Michael Phillip here. Thanks for exploding out of a star, seeding the earth, gestating for a few billion years and emerging from a vaginal portal as a conscious union of billions of organisms so that you could listen to this show in this moment. Really nice of you. This episode of Third Eye Drops is brought to you by Eat Dream Bee Bars. These things are a tasty alchemy of organic deliciousness and dream hacking. You can get 20% off and start your quest toward lucid dreaming today at eatdreambee.com/third eye drops. This Mind Meld is also brought to you by Sheath Underwear, a fantastically comfortable pair of drawers with a secret compartment. Get 20% off your purchase by using the coupon code Third Eye Drops at sheathunderwear.com.
Third Eye Drops are intended for open-minded adults. Now administering Third Eye Drops.
My wooey brethren and I love to use this term, consensus reality. The idea that we are co-creating a mutually accepted framework for what is. But I want to introduce a new phrase. It's kind of a direct progeny of consensus reality. It's consensus mediocrity. This idea that somewhere amongst the collection of societal hoops that we're all jumping through and the onslaught of obligations we all have to deal with, we get caught in a crippling trap of habituations. We start thinking the same way and having the same goals as everyone else, and this causes a recursive pattern of behaviors that amounts to a sort of self-nullification. We become an indoctrinated, indebted member of society that's neatly smashed into a box of limits. And breaking out of that box can be a monstrous task, especially when your own momentum and your own actions are forcing you to shovel a new layer of self-limiting sediment atop the box that your ideal self is hibernating inside of. So if you want to free that sleeping, fire-breathing, mediocrity-torching version of yourself, you've already made the all-important first step, and you have all of my astral love and support, brothers and sisters. But you got to be willing to make your habituations walk the plank. You've got to surround yourself with a community that wants and values the same things that you do. You've got to be willing to go out there or in there and have the adventures and make the sacrifices necessary. You've got to stop allowing other authorities to use your energy as a battery to power their reality tunnel. So anyway, on this episode of the show, we actually have a really beautiful example of somebody who was able to blow the lid off of the box that they were trapped within. His name is Niles Heckman, and he's actually an artist with some really iconic brands on his resume, like Star Wars, Avatar, Marvel. But even these sort of hallowed, legendary pieces of media only served as a fuel to fire his desire to create something existentially meaty and original. And eventually, the lid did fly off that desire, leading to the genesis of a project called Shamans of the Global Village. It is a documentary series that you can actually catch the first episode of at shamansoftheglobalvillage.com. But I believe you will only be able to stream it for free until this Thursday, so get amongst it, my friends. And also joining us on this show is my man, Michael Garfield, who is another man that has been exercising his creative muscles in a multitude of admirable ways for years through his art and through speaking and music. And you can catch him on the Future Fossils podcast, or likely on the road and online, I believe. I think he wants me to mention his Patreon page, patreon.com/Michael Garfield, to be precise. And of course, we shall commence this mind meld momentarily, but I want to thank a couple of our sponsors. The first one is a new one, Eat Dream Bee. They make some magical bars, that I am totally obsessed with. And if you are at all interested in lucid dreaming, you've got to try these things. They allow you to sort of eat your way to a richer, deeper dreamscape. So in addition to being an organic, tasty bar filled with legit ingredients, they actually supply the building blocks for neurotransmitters like serotonin, which is really key around bedtime, especially because it helps slow down and quiet your mind. But honestly, you're going to just want to munch the fuck out of these things throughout the day anyway, because they're delicious, especially the cherry ones. And if you go to eatdreambee.com/third eye drops, you will get 20% off of said bars. We are also brought to you by Sheath Underwear. And if you haven't heard, these are not just your run-of-the-mill underwear. They have an internal pocket that is like a fortress of solitude for your manhood. And it is also just really fantastic for the jostling that occurs during working out. Or you can just not use the pouch and wear them like a normal pair of comfy undies. But as I always say, don't you dare even think about using Sheath's concealed pocket to transport anything illicit, although it would be perfect for that. You goddamn scoundrel, you. So, yes, head to sheathunderwear.com and use the coupon code ThirdEyeDrops to get 20% off of your purchase. And let's be real, buying underwear is always a fun thing to do for other people, and it has the added bonus of having the pouch, which you will have to explain, which will be fun. I also want to stress that although these sponsors are fantastic, we really need your direct support to keep growing. The best way is to become a patron at patreon.com/thirdeyedrops. In addition to supporting these mind melds, you will also get rewards. The reward you get will depend on what tier of support you give. And you will also, no matter what tier you're a part of, gain admission to a special patrons-only community. And I can definitely foresee Patreon helping to grow this show significantly and expand what we're able to do and create. But it's up to you guys. So again, head to patreon.com/thirdeyedrops to support the show. And of course, you can also head to thirdeyedrops.com where you can support the show in a number of ways, like mayhaps by doing your holiday shopping through our Amazon portal, or donating or grabbing a psychedelic Kitty Sage Cypher t-shirt from our store. And of course, thank you for just listening, and a massive ball of gratitude to everyone who's taken a moment to leave us a nice review and hit the subscribe button on iTunes or wherever it is you allow me to wiggle waveforms into your ear holes through. And if you haven't, take a moment to check out mindpodnetwork.com and timewheel.net. They have some fantastic content that I know you will want to voraciously slurp down.
Really doesn't. I forget. I haven't looked at it in a while. Does my biography mention my decade of participation in failed visionary startups?
Dude, failure are but stepping stones on the path to success. That's what my homeroom teacher's poster says.
Peter Pan said death is an awfully great adventure. So I assume that's what you're talking about when you say success.
Maya Angelou said, greatness is but an emergent phenomenon of being. I just made that up. It's not even real!
I was going to say, that doesn't really sound like an Angelou quote there.
Yeah,
Dude,
it sounds off the cuff, buddy.
It was off the cuff.
The period's what did it, though. If she'd have said greatness is a consequence of being stepped on, I might have believed you.
When you just said something about a period, and I thought you were going to make a joke about the fact that she was a woman, and I was like, whoa, we're going ad hominem here. What's going on?
I don't think we need this podcast to be another one of those where I vicariously hit on your girlfriend and mention oral sex within 5 minutes, so we can stay away.
I don't remember the oral sex part, but I do remember the switcheroo dialogue that came up.
Yeah. Anyway, gentlemen, it's a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to talk to you guys. Michael and I chatted on my podcast, Other Michael, about, I think it was like a couple years ago now. So obviously, Michael's, it's been a while. I mean, Michael, it's somebody, you're obviously always doing your thing and I'm doing my thing. So it's kind of nice to loop back around and have you as part of the conversation. And then, dude, Michael, Third Eye Drops is great, man. You're doing a great thing for somebody that's started something from the bottom up. That's your own kind of conscious original content. And that's part of what we can maybe chat about on this discussion is just kind of, doing your own, finding your own way, doing your own path. And we're all trying to do that in our own kind of mediums.
Thank you, man. Yeah, it's one of those things that I'm just so in it that even if I got to the point where the Sisyphus-like struggle to any sort of stability ended, I think I would still have that left over. I think I would be stained by the desire to not feel like I was successful. You know how you just, if you're struggling for so long, and I'm sure, Michael as another artist that has been, I don't even know how I'm referring to myself as an artist, but that just that feeling of like you're never quite there. You're always reaching for the next handhold and trying to get to the next step on the path. I feel like that struggle almost gives you a weird PTSD in a way where I don't know if I'll ever be able to be comfortable. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if that's just a feature of every creative's path or.
Yeah, that's it, man. I mean, that's Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel right there. It's like he didn't paint shit that he wanted to. He had to paint the commissioned crap that the church wanted him to paint. So it's like this is a struggle as old as time. It's like when you want to do your own thing and make your own stuff and do your own IP versus having to do what just pays you. There's this huge separation between those two usually. So that's what Michael and I were just, chatting about before you came back on, dude, was just kind of I've come to find the balance of those things in life. A synergistic balance, but it is always a struggle with anybody that's trying to do something leading edge.
Yeah, Niles, I'm going to unfortunately make you rattle off a few of the things that you've done because I was looking at your bio and it is pretty impressive, man. Like maybe it's not Sistine Chapel level notoriety, but you've got some bullet points on there that I was pretty impressed by.
Yeah, thank you, dude. Well, what I'll do is I'll chat about my background a bit, and then we'll do the kind of who, what, where, when, why of the show. And then let's do a little chat about kind of like Philip K. Dick talked about empire, because I think it's hard to talk. I know you've done a lot of conversations about shamanism, so it'd be nice to talk about empire a bit, which I can go into, and the whole machine and the struggle of that and how we all struggle with that. And then kind of how that relates to, why we're trying to make the show and the history of, the legacy of shamanism being wiped out by, imperialists and things like that. So I think we can kind of go into that a bit.
Yeah, sure.
Because that's all something we can speak to.
Yeah, that is a fascinating angle. I'm into it. I think it is a good first step to talk about your background, because there are so many people who, they would see the things that you have on your list and think that that's sort of the end all be all. Like that's the ultimate goal of a creative's journey, is to work on these iconic properties and, have your name in the credits of like a Marvel film or something. And here you are trying to go off and do these really do it yourself, independent, documentary style films with global Shamans of the Global Village. And I think a lot of people might think that that's an inverted sort of scenario. Like you would do these small projects first and eventually work your way up to doing these big, large budget, large scale films, but you're almost doing it in this inverted way. And that's fascinating. I'm curious how that occurred.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of an inversion deal, right? Where you may be like, some animator at Pixar working on some world famous movie that's going to make $1 billion, but ultimately you're still a cog in the machine and you're kind of reduced to just a machine-like behavior. But when you're a key creative on something, whether it's a little tiny thing that you've shot with your friends and has a good story, and, it's like you are making your own original content and being your own creative person. So I think that dynamic of, regardless of budget or scale, it's still nice to kind of do the creative stuff that's your own stuff. And then, like we were just talking about, with kind of a balance of what pays the bills, have some sort of day job thing that can sustain you a little bit and still maybe use some of that creative flow. So I've ultimately, at the time we're doing this podcast, I very much still have that balance where I used to do a lot more things that were full-time within assembly lines. And now I kind of just have that as a part-time thing, because I wouldn't want to not have that either and then kind of struggle day to day with, making fake money and imperial commerce. So, well, yeah, I guess maybe I'll give a little bit of my background here. I'll just kind of start in, I guess.
Yeah, please.
So, I mean, at the time we're recording this, I mean, my name's Niles Heckman. I'm the director of this new show that I've made with Rakrazam called Shamans of the Global Village. And ultimately, I mean, my background is I'm essentially an artist and a filmmaker. And I guess I would call myself like a student of philosophy. And well, actually, what I should really do is to take a lead from Mr. Garfield. What I should really say is that, like both of you and your listeners and all of your guests, that I'm more of an infinite fractal of consciousness from source who's currently playing roles in the areas of artistry, filmmaking, and philosophy, because it's a grave error to define ourselves by what we do in, our jobs, which so many kind of sleep people do these days. And Michael and I had kind of previously chatted before, and I think Mr. Garfield, I know we're talking to two Michaels. I'll call Michael Garfield, Mr. Garfield. Michael had a good point. Mr. Garfield had a good point about that, about how so many people just define themselves by their jobs, which is something that maybe up until 5 years ago I still used to do, but I've learned not to do that so much. But I have a background essentially creating visuals for the high-end commercial industry in Los Angeles, much in the trenches of kind of the ad agency world and production companies, and then the Hollywood visual effects industry. And then doing a lot of kind of motion capture and pre-visualization and kind of computer-generated cinematography for the game cinematic industry, because games have become so cinematic and immersive these days. And then being in the Bay Area where I am now, I'm also starting to do some work in and out of virtual reality with some small shops in the Bay Area, since that's kind of the new wave of what's going on these days. But as a young sprout, out of film school, when I didn't know anything about anything, and I feel like now I'm just starting to know a few things, I was very fortunate to get an internship early, which essentially resulted in me working on the Matrix sequels when I was 20 years old, before I'd even graduated from university. So that's a pretty, special thing to have such amazing work as essentially a very young, new artist that's also interested in kind of the post-production side of filmmaking and the actual full production pipeline of how films are made and put together. But, following kind of 10 years of doing a variety of 2D and 3D artist roles, and along with kind of on-set work, working as a supervisor on these kind of amazing Hollywood movies, like, I worked on The Curious Case of Benjamin Button and Happy Feet and Avatar and Tron Legacy, and which I still, I used to do that much more full-time, and I still periodically do that to this day. Like at the time we're recording this podcast, I've just helped finish up working on Rogue One for a few months.
What were you doing on that, on Rogue One, just out of curiosity?
I was just doing visual effects artist work. So, at the very end of a show, they might have a lacking. Basically, when the shots need to get completed, the visual effects for a film, they just bring artists on that essentially just sit on the box. They're just like slaves on the box. So having a variety of working on set and then doing that work on the box as an artist, I just kind of came on to help finish some shots for a sequence of the show.
That's pretty cool, man. And that's pretty cool. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's nothing to complain about in day job land, but working on major movie sets, you see what is good, what is done well, and what is done not so well. So, and you also see the kind of massive amounts of money that are thrown out the door and wasted. So, as somebody that's always been quite multidisciplinary, I would kind of look around at other people in my field. This was when I was kind of earlier on in my, I guess what you could say, quote unquote, career, even though there are no careers. It's kind of a bullshit word, but many other people seemed very content with just kind of doing one single thing. And it still seems kind of, just kind of being a cog in the machine, being a cog in an assembly line. And I was always, really feeling like, why does everybody feel that way? And feeling kind of demonstrably underutilized in what I was doing, even in really cool day job land, So about 10 years ago, I started to break away a bit and start creating my own content, because it is ultimately about, for any creative person or any artistic person, about kind of doing your own intellectual property a bit, rather than just kind of slaving to other people's ideas. So at the same time, I was, always being very curious and questioning the deeper things of the world, and being interested in, and not philosophy in the sense of like this kind of, starchy, dry academic sense, but in like not, which maybe like from an academic sense of philosophy, they would call it like the study of the nature of reality or existence. But I'm thinking of more of it in a like the etymology of the word, which is philosophia, just meaning love of wisdom. So just kind of always trying to seek out wisdom and knowledge and truth. And through the years, working in the industry, I had a lot of time, sometimes working on boxes, or sometimes being, by box, I just mean a computer, of course, but sometimes working on boxes, sometimes being on film sets where I'd have earbuds in, always listening to kind of, really interesting books on tape or podcasts, and just trying to always be in a constant quest for learning and exploration and understanding and, gaining insight. And obviously in Hollywood, there are very cool people working in the trenches from kind of the lower levels, I would say, many of which are quite creative. But Hollywood as a kind of an inner club is very hierarchical and very kind of hard to break into and hard to get anything that's of your own content made. So for many creative people, they just kind of have to do whatever their slotted role they can get in some fake hierarchy is. And so, this led me to kind of look around at what basically happens in this kind of work level of being very compartmentalized and very kind of like everybody's supposed to just do one thing, which I never really bought into. That kind of inevitably led me to look at that from, a creative industry level, from kind of a societal level, from, looking at things in terms of a cultural level, which ultimately I think leads us to kind of look at our economic systems, our corporate systems, our political systems. And it's just kind of like layers of zoom, right? Where you keep zooming out and kind of look into how so much of what's going on in terms of reducing people's creativity or artisticness or their growth is what the entire kind of Western world seems to be about in a lot of ways, because it's very robotic and very mechanic. And that kind of also, would always lead me into just asking why. And that, of course, ends up, if you're in this process of always being why-based, it can be a huge rabbit hole that it sends you down, because it's just a massive, massive search for the truth that the more you learn, the less you know. Yeah. Right. So long story short, I had been going through a series of steps through this kind of time while I was also trying to do more of my own creative projects of, I guess you could say, growth and awakening. And it wasn't one massive light bulb turning on moment. It was just kind of over numerous years where you'd look into one thing and that'd lead you to another thing, and you'd find one person's work, and, it was just a gradual process of kind of growing and learning and always trying to expand. And I think in terms of creating content, it's like you can't really create awesome stuff until you do some of that inner work on yourself. And otherwise, you're just going to be kind of regurgitating the same things that we've seen over and over again. And while understanding this and being part of Hollywood, I kind of came to have a zoom out on what Hollywood is about in a lot of ways too, which is, this kind of very base chakra, unconscious content that is just kind of designed to, it's almost like an act of sorcery, a lot of it, where it's just predictive programming, and a lot of it's just very doomy, and a lot of it's really dystopian, and, a lot of it's just kind of stuff that's repackaged differently. So at the same time, while, it's like I'm seeing these things within me, I'm looking at the industry that I'm in and seeing that there's pros to it and then there's huge cons to it in terms of the actual content that's made. Mm-hmm. So, as anybody that's interested in creating something like a book or music or film, I mean, this is the type of dynamic where if you want to make something that stands the test of time, you need to kind of have that internal attainment where you need to build up cool things. You need to read those, deep things of the world and seek out all the good stuff so that what you make has some substance to it and some depth and some allegory and some symbolism. And, cut to 5 to 10 years later of me kind of always looking into this stuff, I think it's now starting to kind of manifest in my filmmaking work, my kind of personal content that I'm making. And that's, it's all a balance between kind of side hobby and what you have to do to kind of bring in a paycheck. But it is kind of rare to find people that are both good creatively and technically, let alone good at, having some sort of attainment in terms of deeper understanding of the way that the world works, or that, what we know we're capable of as amazing, kind of spiritual beings in our own right. So since, most people in the Western world have a huge lacking of direct experience, I started to have some of these direct experiences, and then, that's now starting to kind of manifest in projects that I'm putting forth now, like this documentary series that we're going to talk about, Shamans of the Global Village, that we've created. So
yeah, and I think that is a really interesting story arc. And even though Michael and I, we're both doing our own things, and we've been trying to escape the sort of paradigm of having your life energy transmuted into dollars for somebody else, which is in a lot of ways, I guess, what you're also experiencing by working on other people's projects. But obviously there are levels to this. I mean, none of us are tilling the fields or, cleaning toilets, so it could be a lot worse. But at the same time,
Facebook's kind of like cleaning a toilet.
What's that?
Paying for Facebook ads is kind of like cleaning a toilet.
Dude, I would rather pay for a Facebook ad than clean a toilet. I guess it's sort of like an internal narcissistic toilet cleaning where that this is coming from. There's always like some sort of egoic component to what you're doing, right? I mean, there has to be. These things can't be mutually exclusive. You can't be only for, purely to spread light into the universe. You can't be paying for a Facebook ad because your own ego is tied into it, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, this is off the topic and I apologize, but I did have a conversation with a guy today who was making the point that at least with YouTube, you can create something and get paid for it. Mm-hmm. And there's no such option on Facebook. The only option that you have as a Facebook user is to create content and then pay Facebook so that people will see it. So it's actually like it's really almost an inconceivable business model that only works because they have everybody by the nuts, as it were.
Yeah, and that's the struggle of anybody that's kind of bypassing the old gatekeepers, the old middlemen these days, which obviously the democratization of the internet has allowed us to do, where we have so much, somebody creates something like yourself, Mr. Garfield, and you basically have content and you want to get it out to an audience. And it's like, you got to go through the social networking, the new paradigm dynamics of how we get these things out here. But it's all about kind of building up these social networks, which is something that I'm very much learning about now with this new show, because it's something that very much like any of our struggles, you just got to go out there and put yourself out there, and you don't have this whole machine to promote all your stuff for you. So you have to be your own business side of the whole operation, which takes up a significant amount of more time than you want to be as an artist or as a creative. It's like you have to wear so many hats doing it.
Yeah. But on that note, it's also sort of an interesting parallel, Niles, because, you're working in this industry where it's essentially retelling, through an allegorical veil, these same sort of archetypical stories, right? Of somebody overcoming something, or, how many stories out there are really just, re-encapsulations of, the monomyth, or of like the Osirian myth cycle, or the Jesus myth, or whatever, these kind of story tropes that we retell with different packaging over and over again. And almost nobody in their life, I think our generation's a little bit different, but most people don't ever come into contact with the fact that they need to have that experience for themselves. And you said that you started having these experiences for yourself, and that's, if I'm, deducing this correctly, that's what set you on this path that you're currently on. What were some of those experiences, and how did you come to the conclusion that you wanted to start moving away from these, big money Hollywood type projects and move on to these smaller, kind of more spiritually informed projects?
Yeah, anybody that creates kind of more, I guess you would say, conscious content, which is something where it's not just, hey, it's a superhero movie, things are exploding and people are fighting, or like, hey, it's a science fiction movie and things are exploding and people are fighting, or like, hey, it's an action movie and things are exploding and people are fighting. It's like there's so much more to what we can tell in terms of the stories, and a very narrow range of bandwidth of what you see on screen is what's ever shown. And there's thousands of screenplays that have deeper substance to them that probably are sitting on shelves never to be made. A few years ago, I started this kind of series of side conversations around this little kind of podcast I do that's a tertiary thing. And a lot of the people I was talking to are just really amazing, interesting people. And, one guest led to another, and the podcast kind of started as something where I was more just talking about somebody's latest creative project. And now it's kind of turned into more about the general growth and creativity of people as a whole and the species as a whole, and what is allowed and come to that. But because of just my relationships with some of these people, it's like I kind of started getting more into documentary filmmaking, because so many of these people, it was like you could just put them on camera and go, and it'd be really interesting, and it's like you can bypass the casting process. It's not to say that I wouldn't still make narrative content, but I've been kind of more drawn to documentary filmmaking, because it's like what's really out there is so much more visceral and interesting sometimes than what you see in fiction. So I think this show, kind of came about because I think I had met Rak, and I'm speaking of the host of the show, Rak Razam. I think I had met Rak through the podcast. And so it was like, here's an example of somebody that I had chatted with a few times on a podcast, and we decided to kind of collaborate on this project. But at the same time, I think it was not only those types of relationships being built, but then also having just these weird kind of synchronistic things happening in my life where, first off, I realized, kind of backtracking, that I had worked in Hollywood on a surprising amount of films in the fairly short list of films that I worked on. I think I only worked on 20 movies or something, but a lot of those, maybe almost half of them, seem to have these kind of Gnostic and shamanic themes. And, like the Matrix sequels, I mean, at the time, I didn't know the deeper themes of those films, and I didn't have the language to describe them or to understand them. But then, working on things like Avatar, and I kind of briefly worked on The Fountain, very, very briefly, which, is a very
cool.
Yeah, time tunnel, nonlinear film. And then, Tron, that's this kind of alternate, these kind of multidimensional themes within the, mainstream Hollywood, because anything in Hollywood that does get made that has deeper depth in it kind of has to do it like how an ancient text does it, where it is encoded with allegory and symbolism. And it's not like things that have more shamanic themes in them can't be very commercially successful, because I mean, these are massive, successful movies financially at the box office that have some of these things in them. But I didn't have the words to understand that or explain that. And so I kind of had realized after the fact that I'd understood what shamanism was, for example, and had some psychedelic experiences, that there were deeper things in these projects that I'd also worked on it, but at the time I hadn't realized that. And then another kind of layer of synchronicity that was interesting is that in my background, the kind of half a dozen things that I was really good at happened to be the half a dozen things that I needed to kind of break off on my own and be an independent filmmaker and make things that hopefully have really paradigm crushing content with somewhat of a similar production value, having a background where your quality bar for what is high is your quality bar is very high because of the nature of the projects that you work on. So the kind of plan these days is to try and incorporate those high production values into these projects that are more, more in line with things that you talk about on this show, and more in line of themes that are more dynamic. And I guess maybe because of the podcast, I had found myself spending time with shamans and mystics and other initiates, kind of both in life and in and related to these projects. And, one thing that's also funny, Michael, I should mention, is that the two main shamans that I've had my biggest life experiences with have been on your podcast.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, like Hamilton Souther was the first time that he ever did his cannabis shamanism I was with him for that. And there were a few of us, and we were doing it basically in a high-rise building in Los Angeles, California, overlooking the UCLA campus. Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting coincidence when I saw that Hamilton had been on your podcast. And then obviously our show focuses on Octavio Redig, who has been another previous guest on your podcast. And I would encourage people to go listen to that episode, because I don't need to go and give the whole backstory on Octavio, because you've obviously done that whole kind of episode with him. But it's just those kind of life synchronicities that have allowed me to kind of seek out the projects that I'm doing now. And these projects are so profound, like both the pilot episode of the show and and this next documentary project, just because of the people that I've been working on them with. It's like been this massive learning experience of it's not so much about the work, it's about the growth you get out of the work. And I've really come to realize that through the years, and as you do these projects, and they keep getting more and more interesting, because there's rewards.
I got to ask you this question. Being that you worked on Avatar, there's this notorious scene that was cut from the movie of like a psychedelic initiation. Do you know anything about that scene? Because the only thing that I've seen that exists is this really rough cut. And I thought it was fake at first. And then I did a little bit of research, and it seems like it's actually was real at one point. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, you're probably looking at the previs, which is the really rough kind of animatic that's done. They don't edit the movie. When you're doing a very expensive, full on, essentially fully animated film, you do it in rough form, which is called pre-visualization. And that's what I've done in the game cinematic industry. So it's essentially just really sloppy, rough models that are done so that you can cut the sequence together. It's essentially moving storyboards. So you probably saw a early previs sequence from Avatar that was, on the cutting room floor before they took it to final, because taking all the shots to final is so expensive. So it probably got cut an earlier version of the edit. But, in terms of that film, I mean, I listened to the CineSync sessions when I worked on that. CineSync is where they have the client recorded calls with Lightstorm, which is, Jim Cameron's production company. So I would listen to the client calls with Jim, and it was really interesting to hear the process of just his filmmaking process. It's kind of like, it's kind of like, to go back to the Michelangelo metaphor, it's like listening to this really amazing filmmaker talk about how he, painted the Sistine Chapel. It's like the best film school you can imagine. But in terms of that scene, I don't know the exact details of why that hit the cutting room floor, but I think it's probably one of those things where it's just like the movie was already at 3 hours, so that particular scene had to go. But I think Jim has had some ayahuasca experiences, and I'm not sure if Avatar came about because of his experiences or if he's had those since then. So I can't really speak to that. I know that's kind of urban legend.
Those sorts of things.
It definitely, that previs definitely seemed to be, if it wasn't Cameron's own personal experience, it was somebody's.
Yes.
Because the flavor and the aura of that scene was very much, an ayahuasca ceremony.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been. I suspect that maybe, just the level of the perspective that Avatar has in a science fiction wrapper of the struggles of an indigenous culture being taken over by an imperial culture. I mean, and the shamanic themes of that film. I'm probably pretty sure that there's some ayahuasca influence in the kind of larger, spectrum of that movie and the larger overarching themes and the deeper memes in it that, really resonate with people's subconscious. Because even though they don't understand the deeper, it's like they may not understand the deeper depths of what those things directly are trying to say, but there's something resonant with them that they can't explain. And that's why that type of thing is popular for people.
Yeah, it's almost a little bit sad because that movie was such a massive phenomenon, and it would have been a pretty on the nose smack for that to be in the film. And I almost feel like maybe it would have been too much, because there's this notorious thing happening already with so many Westerners, journeying down to the rainforest to do these ceremonies, that it's kind of created this whole gray area economy. And, some people are in it for the wrong reasons. And something of that level may have pushed it to, something that was really unsustainable. So maybe it was a blessing in disguise for that to remain a little bit behind the curtain. Yeah, perhaps. I mean, you never know. Yeah, there's so much that goes into any production. It's amazing, like anything gets made, to be honest. It's really hard to get anything done. I mean, even getting something crap done is even difficult. And for the amount of content that you see online, in terms of any sort of creative venture, I mean, especially filmmaking, because it's such a collaborative venture. And even if you're doing it with smaller budgets and smaller teams, it's still hard to get anything pushed through and across the checkered line. So if you can get anything made, let alone anything good, that is a massive life accomplishment. And for the amount of people that have stuff that have been done, there's infinitely more people that are trying to do something and will never finish it. It's just like writing any huge, long book or, composing some massive, thing or whatnot. Anything difficult in trying, it's like a climbing of Mount Everest. So I have huge respect for people that make anything, let alone anything that's really compelling and deep and of, substance. Yeah, I think everybody's capable of it. It's just a matter of finding out what your own personal niche is. I mean, everybody knows 50 people that have tried to start a podcast, right? And they just kind of fizzle out slowly, or it peters out, or they never really, figure out how to get it in front of the right ears or the right people. And I mean, that's an ongoing struggle that I have. It just happens to be a vessel that I feel somewhat comfortable in. But I think it makes sense that you have to try a few things before you feel like, you're really breaking in that that Birkenstock, it's like you got to get your toe prints
Totally.
molded in there before you know whether or not it's the right fit for you. And I mean, that's kind of an interesting question for you, Michael, because you do so many things that I wonder, do you feel like, I know you've kind of confided in me that you really want your main focus to be music, or at one point you really did at least. And you just kind of felt like art was a path of less resistance or something. So you started doing that too. But at what point do you just say, I'm doing this, and that's what I'm doing?
You're asking the wrong guy, because every year, it seems like I think it's every year at some point in November, I have a crisis where, because November is when I started painting at concerts in 2007. So every year that anniversary comes up for review, and compared to music or compared to writing and public speaking, it's a relatively new thing in my life. It was not something I intended. And so that tends to be where the insecurity gathers and pools, if you will, is in the thing that hasn't been such a core part of my personality, as for quite as long. But I mean, in general, it's this constant insecurity that I live with. Part of it is I forget who said it, but someone said a few years ago, and I might have even brought this up on your show before, that it was like 2 generations ago, someone had a job for their entire life. One job. 1 generation ago, it was, maybe 7 jobs over the course of a life. And this generation, it's 7 jobs at once.
Yeah.
So hold that in one hand. And then on the other hand, hold chase 2 rabbits, catch neither.
Yeah.
And that's, that is the tension that I experience on a daily basis, where I feel constantly like I should not be, I should give up 1 or 2 of these strategies. But at the same time, writing music and visual art all do actually support one another. If I were to find a way to integrate them such that people understand that it's a triforce, that it's 3 faces of a single object. Now, the problem with that is that it's very difficult for me, after 9 years of looking at this, I still have no idea how to present, how to get past the psychological defenses that people have when you add that additional hyphen into your self-description.
Yeah.
When it becomes writer, painter, speaker, philosopher, obvious armchair, ridiculous goofball. And like that, at some point it's my nature as much as anyone else's to say, there's no way that you're doing all of those well.
You're a man of many ers. That should just be your full biography. A man of many ers.
But I think it's, right. I think it's right. Like the way that Niles started this, to say, in a sense that we, part of this great historical swing back toward the archetype of the Black Madonna, the dark, earthy, feminine stuff that we've neglected for the last few hundred years. So much of that is about loosening our fixation with identity based upon what it is that we do. And here we are, 3 guys, and so we have a masculine bias towards self-definition through doing, but there's this other thing where, I was recently at this small gathering. My friend David Brower throws these things called Sensorial Experience Day. And it's a really interesting, it's a small group of people, 10 or 20 people. He does these, it's a full day event. He does them all over the US and Europe. And it's really just this this thing where people are constantly leading one another through interesting exercises, sharing their gifts with one another. That he's hired a private chef and you just eat delicious appetizers all day. It's a really luscious and sensual thing. And the point of it, though, is that you spend the entire day engaging with people in a real and human way, where you're not allowed to look at your phone and you're not allowed to talk about what it is that you do.
Cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Sounds like it's trying to bypass hierarchy.
And my buddy, you guys might know documentarian Charles Shaw.
I don't.
He okay, well he's been a friend of mine for a long time. He's a social justice documentarian and investigative journalist, a real hard ass, and a crusader on very important issues like the prison industrial complex. In a way, he's sort of a necessary ecological counterpoint to the work that you and Rack are doing, Niles. He reminded me before I left for Boom Festival this summer. He's like, in Europe, if all you do is talk about what you do and hand out your business card and ask people, what they do, then you're going to look like a boorish American asshole. Mm. It's like the important thing is engaging with who they are.
Yes.
And, in this moment, not like, because, asking somebody what they do is basically making it obvious that you're seeking a way to exploit them.
Right.
You're seeking some sort of instrumental value. And like, as soon as I realized that, I was like, oh my God, like I need to, I have made myself into a product. After that, it takes nothing to be exploited by these other institutions and agencies, because I've already declared that I can be reduced to my own hyphenated job description.
And that's also a side effect of narcissistic personality disorder too, in terms of somebody trying to evaluate you in terms of how you compare to them, and allowing yourself to be kind of looked on as your accomplishments, be defined by what you've accomplished.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
6 billion YouTube views. That's who I am. Yeah.
Exactly. What's the surface level perception of what you are versus what the actual real, I guess you could say it's between kind of the exoteric perception of what your outer shell is and how you look to the rest of the world and how you function on social media, and what the kind of outside shell is versus what really esoterically is going on, and how so much of our, real deal work is what we do ourselves that doesn't need any, it's all introspective, right? So it doesn't need any outside influence or any, it's nice when you put something out there, like Mr. Garfield, if you're putting out like a piece of artwork and you get a nice response from it, that's a nice feeling. And it's nice to have the community for feedback. But if you're needing that kind of like feedback just to fuel yourself, it's like so much social networking is just this mirror for people that post shit on some social network just because they feel empty themselves and they need external gratification or they need attention. So it's a balance. And we all have to do that kind of promotion these days too. So I understand that balance.
Interesting that the first U.S. election in which people of voting age grew up entirely surrounded by the internet. Like this one, this is the one. It's like you look back 18 years and, here we are.
Yeah.
And it's this sociocultural surround, which encourages this sort of, uncritical filtering of information, the sort of like resonant social approval stuff that you guys are talking about, that it's, and I don't, it's just a vortex, and I'm getting sucked into it with every conversation. But it's important, I think, to understand that like the outcomes of our political process are an expression or manifestation of our often unexamined identity as a people. And here we are confronting the realities of the consequences of our in relationship to social media in the outcome of this election.
You just circled right back to something that I wanted to say, which was touching on our unexamined identity, because, you were saying that if you talk to people in Europe, for example, in terms of what they do, you're going to look like you're opportunistic or you're looking to exploit those people. But I genuinely believe that if you ask most Americans, if not most human beings, like, who are you? What are you? I don't think anybody has really put a whole lot of thought into that question to the point where they would be really comfortable throwing down on that topic in any sort of meaty, meaningful way. I think that would I think that would make a lot of people tremendously uncomfortable. And that is sad. And it shines a light on just how effective our whole paradigm is at shifting the spotlight away from those sorts of, immensely important intellectual, ontological questions about who you are, what you are, why you're here in the first place. But you haven't ever really considered it because you've been busy jumping through all of these hoops and defining yourself by title and accomplishment. And I almost think that's got to circle back again to your course, Niles, in, doing that thing really well, being lucky enough to have worked on some of these, gold medal wearing projects and box office smashes and stuff. Yet, again, here you are detaching yourself from that almighty teat, trying to do something, more meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. That is kind of that's a good dynamic. I mean, I don't want to say I don't want to say cynical sense. I know you're moving back or completely disconnecting from something. I think it's just a natural process as you become more conscious about the state of things. And like you said, Michael, I mean, most people don't ask these questions of why. Most people don't really talk about much of anything. I mean, they only really kind of talk about their role in what they do in their little narrow of compartment of commerce. But people that look outside of that and actually look into some of those deeper questions, I think you inevitably will reach places where you become more conscious in the way that you see the world and the way that you behave in the world. So you inevitably want to start sharing some of those things or bringing some of that back. So I think maybe for you, dude, that started this podcast, it's obviously, the content of this podcast is to the, absolutely to the sky compared to what you'd see on fucking CNN or some, old paradigm thing that's going away. It's like, that says a lot for what you have found within yourself that you then want to share with others and is so helpful for others. And, on that note, dude, just to kind of give a little bit of an esoteric stance on this. I don't know if you've ever heard, there's a book that's kind of like it's kind of like the main book that mysticism is based around. Mysticism is a series of spiritual practices based around a book called the Corpus Hermeticum. I don't know if you're familiar with this book, but in the Corpus Hermeticum, there's a line that says, "Don't die without any children." And that doesn't actually mean physical children. It doesn't mean, you have to have kids, be fruitful and multiply. It's actually an encoded, have babies.
Thought babies.
Procreate.
It's thought babies. You got to have thought babies.
Thought babies. Well, yeah, close, man. Not too far off. The encoded real meaning of what that means is you should help others. As you learn, you should help others in their kind of spiritual path as well. So, don't have any people that you don't help with their development as you've gone along and have developed. So something like a podcast like this is certainly a nice vehicle to help people along those kind of stepping stones.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I hope that I'm in some sort of incremental, infinitesimal way helping people inch towards something that, helps them define themselves or helps them find meaning. I mean, for me, honestly, a lot of it is sort of a kind of self-important endeavor because it's self-discovery as much as it is putting something out there. And as Michael, you and I have definitely talked about how, in a way, even though, we are putting content out by podcasting or something, there is sort of this selfish element to it because you do get to talk to all of these really fascinating people that you'd never get to talk to otherwise. So it's, that's that same sort of thinking of you can't put out a Facebook ad without some sort of narcissistic ego elevating element to it because it is your page, it is your property, it's your brand, whatever, even if you do have a, proper positive intention behind it. So I think everything's always going to be a twist cone, like a chocolate vanilla binary of egotism and something existentially valuable, hopefully, if you're at least building that into your conversation in any way. Do you like, Niles, do you feel like you have done that through any of these larger projects, or is that one of the major kind of magnets pulling you out of it at this point? Do you think, are you trying to focus more on that in earnest because you don't feel like this other thing has been doing that? Or is it just kind of a natural progression?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what I chat about, a lot of kind of my shtick with things, and like Mr. Garfield just keyed on, I mean, with doing so many different things and being a Renaissance man, which, you know, maybe he and I share that commonality of doing multiple things to the point where it's hard to brand yourself. It's hard to kind of give a quick soundbite as to what you do. And if you have a lot of commas in your business card, some people frown on that, even though, you know, talented people are good at multiple things. And like he said, you know, it's all legs to the same table. Like what I found is that the more kind of what would be considered an old paradigm mainstream project of kind of red carpet champagne dreams, the more you kind of, unless you happen to be one of very few people at the top of some hierarchy that's, you know, running that project or doing the key creative things on that project, most people that work on a project like that, it's great to even be able to work on something like that for your day job. I mean, that's a very special and nice day job, but at the same time, it's not creative work. It's very technician-based work. And I think us as human beings, a lot of what my shtick is that I talk about is kind of growth and creativity, and how I think everybody is fundamentally way more creative than they think, but we have creativity smashed out of us because there aren't so many bad people. There's just more bad systems that, you know, reduce and lower people and lower human consciousness. So a classic example of that is somebody that wants to do something creative or go off and be an artist, but their parents, you know, make them get some fucking job on Wall Street or something. So, you know, conform to the systems that allow for, you know, the almighty dollar. So in terms of what I've found with what I've done, it's just like, I feel so much more internally fulfilled by creating something that is something that fuels my soul, even if it's something that, you know, you just go out and do by yourself and it's a tiny little thing and hardly gets anybody looking at it. I mean, there's a stair step of how when you create something that really resonates with people and then you get a big response to it, that's great. But I think that's ultimately about what really fuels you and your ultimate creativity, because I think a large part of what this is and what we're in and what reality is essentially like a growth learning lab where you're kind of, you could argue maybe that to get kind of spiritual about it is that maybe it's something where, you know, there is no better training ground than Earth, and, you know, souls transit to Earth to live in this kind of 3D corporeal form. And a big part of why you're here is to learn and grow. And, you know, you need to do that through kind of your creative ventures, because what's ultimately nice is if you can really expand and better yourself through your creative ventures and then also sustain yourself in some sort of way that isn't just the struggle where you're suddenly, you know, having to live behind the dumpster or something. So that's the kind of endless struggle. So I've always found that with projects that I feel it's like one of my most potent drugs is that thing when you create something that's your own thing that you're proud of, even if it's just something you painted and hung on the wall and, you know, it's only for you to see. Still, if you created something, that is such a wonderful, enriching feeling. And I could imagine if somebody is creating good content that's not just this kind of, like if somebody's a successful musician and not creating this kind of plastic Vivo crap that gets 1 billion views on YouTube, but something that's actually good. Like if you were Johann Sebastian Bach today and you made something that was amazingly incredible substance, that was this deep, deep music, and it got like a good following, that's the dynamic. That's like amazing if you can reach for that. I think that's what we're all trying to do, is create good stuff and then also get somebody to at least see it.
Yeah, there's definitely a big difference between like Max Richter and Miley Cyrus. You know, it's contemporary music is definitely skewing toward that sort of, I don't even know what the right sort of dirt is to call it, but it's like it's skewing toward, you know, to use your example from earlier, that really base chakra that doesn't require any sort of, you know, emotion. It's literally almost like a way to hypnotize yourself away from reality. Like, I mean, I think we all do this to an extent, I'm sure, but I have friends and loved ones that can never not have a piece of media on. Like if they're walking around, they have music playing. If they're cooking, they have to have the TV on in the background just for noise. Some people like to fall asleep to podcasts or, with the TV on in the background. And that is a serially distracted state. Like, you have to acknowledge that you are running away from the most basic state of being if you can't even be in silence with yourself for 15 minutes while you wash the dishes, that, and that's something, and that's what I think pop music is for. I think it's to keep you in that perpetually, and I'm not saying this is like a conscious conspiracy perpetrated by, the Illuminati or something, but I think it's this recursive feedback loop of artists see that this is successful, so they continue making the same, garbage, and people keep putting it out because it continues to be successful. And that's why it's successful, because it doesn't take any sort of processing or brain power or consideration to let it plop into your brain. It just happens to you. It's just the kind of thing that happens to you.
Yeah, it's very plastic, and it's lowest common denominator. And I know what you mean. It's this kind of like mall music, or movie theater music, or this kind of like the music that you hear when you're in the the lobby or something. That's kind of this poppy crap that seems to be like very standard operating and very just kind of like the same thing over and over again. So that dynamic is something where I think that appeals, that has mass appeal. And it's something that is like, you almost could look at like YouTube views for some sort of plastic Vivo music video as a barometer on how the society's doing, because, some freaking Nicki Minaj, like, I got a big fat ass video is going to have a million, is going to have a freaking billion YouTube views, while, Manly P. Hall's Search for Truth is going to have 1,000 views. So that kind of shows you that for Muggles, I mean, and the Muggles were people from Harry Potter that didn't have access. They were outside of Hogwarts that didn't have access to the magic. Most people today are good people. And again, I kind of look at the thing of, there aren't so much bad people, there's bad systems. But most people, because of these bad systems, are kind of turned into these Muggle robotic lemming people. And that has mass appeal to those people, that kind of shallow baby pool crap. So anything that has more depth to it, it's going to be a harder uphill battle to kind of reach for that. But I think as times change and people, more nodes on the network switch on, people like content like the things that we're trying to produce, and you get more and more of people resonating with that material.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, I heard you. I heard you clear.
Isn't now a good time to talk about Westworld?
In my opinion, it is, and that actually, I think that is a good counterbalance, because we just got done bashing mainstream media, but at the same time, there is really good thought-provoking content being made. Westworld is a great example of that. I was in the theater last night watching Arrival, and I cried. Like, there really is good stuff being made, but and maybe there's more of it than ever, but I think proportionally it's probably worse than ever.
Well, no, I mean, it's the same. We're running along this. People freak out about this because of the filter bubble, but we're running the same, what they call scale-free network dynamics. It's a universal scaling laws. It doesn't matter how big a thing is. The cube of a number is always going to be an exponent of 3. Square of a number is always going to be the exponent of 2. So it's like, it's the third exponent and the second exponent. So like in this case, we are experiencing a fire hose of new media. And depending on where we're standing and what angle we're at, we're going to say, oh, it's all going to hell in a handbasket, or this is the golden age of television, or whatever. But it's all nonsense. It's any of those views is equally and oppositely argued. So, but like the thing that interests me, the reason I bring that up is, in relationship to, the discussion of the, what is like satisfying to people, and like the loops that we get into, and like the easy ways that we allow ourselves to be manipulated, and it's actually, it's not, for me, the interest is not merely in, because I know that I've heard this a lot on your show, Michael, that there's, we talk about the new opportunities that are emerging within these spaces like Netflix and HBO, where they know that they have a pre-subscribed audience and they've got a lot greater creative freedom. Like I was just talking with JF Martel on Future Fossils podcast, an episode we haven't published yet about Stranger Things, and how Stranger Things was only possible because it was on Netflix, and like how such an amazing show was turned down by
everyone,
everyone that they went to, because it had a separate plot lines for this children and the adults, and they thought it was too complicated for viewers because two plot lines is too hard to follow. But like, really, for me, it's not like, wow, congratulations, we're producing this stuff, so much as let's look at what, these themes that come up, like you were mentioning earlier, Niles, the way that esoteric wisdom or insight is coded into something, it's wrapped in sugar so that it can subvert our fiction, subvert our like psychic immune system.
It's like a
right.
caramel,
so that
but it has DMT filling instead of cream.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's signal to noise ratio, right? Because it is amazing times. I mean, there's been no better time to make content. And are you guys familiar with this term Sturgeon's Law, which says that 90% of everything is crap?
But that sounds right.
So
I was just talking about that today. Yeah.
Yeah. So like if if 90% of everything is crap, but they're making more stuff, I mean, there's going to be a higher amount of 10% that's really good stuff. So I feel great when I see something coming out of Hollywood that's amazing, awesome stuff, or out of the game industry that's like, holy shit, there's some amazing wisdom in this that is done with a high budget. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. And that's nice to see, and I am encouraged by that when I rarely do see that.
Niles, with your perspective on the creative side of all of these projects, you're talking about this esoteric knowledge encoded within stories, within movies, within games. Do you think that is a knowingly perpetrated occurrence, or do you think that's just coincidence, like these stories or these archetypes are somehow just interwoven with our consciousness so much that we unknowingly just keep perpetrating these narratives? Have you talked to somebody, or that sounds so like shadowy. Have you talked to somebody behind the scenes? But have you ever had anybody convey to you that they really were trying to add these things in consciously?
I mean, in my time, I've met some names that are pretty renowned names, but I never actually like hobnobbed with them or gotten them to directly tell me that. But my suspicion is that it's two things. I mean, one, it is in the kind of, I guess you could say, the collective unconscious of the species. When something happens where, the Wachowskis write The Matrix, and they know about Gnostic themes, but just because of the way that the kind of puzzle pieces came together, there's so many more layers in there that are encoded messages than even they consciously are aware of. At the same time, while having done some, having some attainment, and I kind of use this word attainment in the sense of like, if you're able to go off and read Rudolf Steiner or something, and you can understand 10% of it, that's amazing. And then you come back a year later and you understand 20% of it, and you kind of build that attainment where you can read these old texts. Most people can't sit down and read anything to go back to your comment, Michael, about kind of, people's attention spans and how, people can't even, it takes a long time to really pick apart some sort of piece of really huge depth and wisdom on the page. Most people can't do that these days. And that's kind of very much an active attempt to keep people from having that really, quieting of the conscious mind so that the subconscious mind can really come through and read deeper things. But I think if somebody is a screenwriter and they have a little bit of that and they kind of insert some undertones into a screenplay, it's not the same as somebody that was writing some deep hermetic text, 1,000 years ago. But I think it's a little bit of a combination of the both, where somebody has a little bit of understanding to put some themes in there, knows that in order to have mass appeal, like anything of any sort of esoteric knowledge has ever been. And just for those that, I know you've talked about the esoteric on this podcast before, but just to define it for anybody that's not familiar, I mean, the esoteric is essentially the inside, and the exoteric is the outside. So I kind of think of like the exoteric as the muggles, and the esoteric is the Jedi, right? So this Jedi knowledge, that's super deep encoded knowledge, which is always found within, because it's always about, what we find within ourselves, because ultimately, in terms of as above, so below, as within, so without, so much of what is really going on is a reflection of what's internally happening within us. So if somebody has a little bit of that, or is just at the beginnings of kind of starting to understand those processes, and I think a lot of the conversations that you have on this podcast, Michael, are understanding that kind of internal versus external dynamic. I think if you have that at least a little bit, and there's something where just coincidentally the puzzle pieces came together, you'll get something that's pretty special on the page. And then, just like getting anything made is so difficult to do, if something then gets made that makes it onto the screen, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And difficult.
Yeah, and the silver lining to this whole like dumbing down narrative that we've been talking about, where people can't sit still and read a black and white page for any extended amount of time. Maybe that really is just a product of the fact that we're so used to a certain benchmark of novelty now that has a certain amount of, flashes and bangs and colors and interactivity. And maybe that's a good thing, because obviously we're on the precipice of some sort of media evolution that's going to fundamentally probably shift the way that we consume knowledge. I mean, I had this thought again to bring up Arrival. It was such a thought-provoking film, but I had this side thought during the movie where I thought to myself, how long is it going to be till I'm the main character in this movie? How long is it going to be till this is happening to me? And I don't think it's going to be that much longer now. I mean, video games are an obvious step in this direction, where even if you're not, in a first person game looking out of the eyeballs of the character, that is an avatar for you. You are experiencing whatever this character is going through in some base manner. And we're just going to continue deepening that experience, where we're going to be able to live these archetypical journeys and these archetypical adventures and evolutions in a very real way, where we're going to be able to disconnect from that and possibly really learn something about ourselves. And that's something that's, you can do that through reading, but there's a lot more processing and indirect sort of things that need to happen for that to occur.
Yeah. One thing that is really going to be something that, like, I use this term of like, your learning and your growth. And I think a big part of what we're in is this kind of learning dynamic, and that we're in this kind of learning lab, and all of that is your own internal learning, because it's really about your direct experiences and your processes. And not to, again, as we talk about narcissism and ego, I mean, it's the difference between just being an egomaniac or a narcissist versus like self or selflessness, or like letting, to use kind of ancient terms, letting my will be done versus letting thy will be done, being more in service to others, but then understanding that in order to do that, you really need to work on yourself. So that dynamic, where I think there's that realization that people, that it's all about kind of those internal dynamics, to realize that part of maybe what we're doing with this show, for example, which is essentially about talking about some of the resurgences of shamanic practices in the West, and how, people are looking to some of these internal processes, because they realize that so much of what's going on externally around us is just in complete, absolute meltdown in terms of our, education systems and our religions and our legal systems, even, a lot of our entertainment systems, our mental and physical health, our, finance, politics, blah, 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 which is all kind of, it's almost like a lot of it is so terrible and just deplorably bad that it's almost designed to get you to look inside at yourself. And, that is that's kind of a big tell for me, to kind of help show people that it is ultimately about each individual's path of learning and discovery and understanding.
Yeah, I think in all of those things you just mentioned, we are living in a situation where all of those things now are built off of a bedrock of capitalism. Like, you have all of these things, like it used to be that these things were all sort of independent silos, and capitalism really seeped in and took over all of them. I mean, look at somebody like a Joel Osteen or something. How many millions of dollars does this guy who's supposed to just be running a church have? It's seeped into everything, from politics to healthcare to religion, and it's really the only thing propping up our civilization right now. It's just a different shade. It's just a different like t-shirt on capitalism at this point. And I think when you and Android Jones says this, that he frames it almost in almost like it's a holy war. Like, there's this massive satanic egoistic force that's sweeping over culture right now, and there are only these little kind of glints of light that are really trying to do something from a pure standpoint, from a horizon broadening standpoint. And I think, unfortunately, even though we are on the precipice of all of these, paradigm shattering technologies I was talking about, I think it's really going to take some fighting, because we're just going to keep making Call of Duty over and over, or Grand Theft Auto over and over. By the way, both games I've enjoyed playing, but we could have these be like, Terrence McKenna-esque personal breakthrough Gnostic evolutionary psychedelic experiences, but it's going to take somebody not giving a shit about how much money it makes. It's going to take somebody making something huge and giving it away for free, probably about 1,000 times over, to ever get to anything approaching that.
Yeah, and to kind of answer more your previous question, I mean, a lot of what's going on with VR, I'm understanding. I mean, VR is obviously kind of a new technology that has a lot of possibility in terms of immersion and, creating other world experiences. But what VR ultimately is, it's basically a duplication of our internal technologies with an external technology, but then with content that is sanctioned by the system, right? So it's not like you're allowed to go off and smoke something that alters your consciousness, at least in, like the United States, for example, but you're perfectly fine to put on a VR headset and to have go into some trippy realm, right? So it's that kind of dynamic of, I mean, I guess this could kind of lead into a full discussion on, what Android Jones maybe talked about, or what I had a huge life realization from reading Philip K. Dick's Valis, which in Valis,
let's go there.
Yeah, let's go there, buddy. So in Valis, Dick reoccurringly says numerous times that the empire never ended. And when I read that book, I was kind of like, wow, the empire never ended. And he referred to the empire as kind of the black iron prison. And, oftentimes in other places you hear about this as kind of the dominant power structure, or the machine, the matrix, kind of the default mode, normal, everyday waking reality. And I've always kind of thought about the dynamic where, we look at cycles of time like processional cycles, and how I'm getting very convinced from kind of a matriarchal sense that we are on these cycles of time, which are these very long cycles.
Like
arguably. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Like yuga cycles, where time is not so much linear, but it's very cyclical. And we kind of have over a very long period of numerous, if it's a 25,000 some year cycle divided by 2, we have these, it's like time is a sine wave where the species goes down in consciousness and then up in consciousness. So through these periods of the down troughs, empire, or like what, you might call like the construct, really becomes more predominant. And what it is what it essentially doing is it's reducing people from a culture that is authentic human culture to just kind of this machine mechanical culture where, people essentially live as machines. And I have this term I sometimes use called childish asleep robots, where people are essentially children in a neoteny sense, where, even the guy that's going to his job every day and wearing the business suit is essentially, he never really grew up. And, in terms of being asleep, like nobody's ever had any sort of direct experiences or any sort of like actual gnosis or kensho moments or realizations that there's more to reality than what the prescribed system allows you to see. And then robots in the sense of like very robotic, like George Gurdjieff talked about how most people just live as machines, and machines they are born and machines they will die, which is essentially this repeating of your day to day, right? Like you go to your shit job every day you don't really like, you sit on the freeway and you just repeat that. And then if you're lucky, you take a couple weeks off a year. And I think that dynamic is an interesting one, because what mystery schools are, and this is kind of what I'm starting to really feel, and of course this is all my, reality tunnel interpretation of this. I'm not some, absolute expert on it, but I'm just kind of sharing what I've kind of have thought to be feeling like it resonates with me. What mystery schools seem like to me is there a saving of the knowledge from the previous processional cycles, right? Like where the species knew more back in the, days of pre-Library of Alexandria. And then certain esoteric Jedi people hang on to that mystery school knowledge, and only initiated people have access to that knowledge. And so Empire is always trying to crush this knowledge. And so the name of the game with people is that it's like we are all here to learn and to spiritually grow, but empire is constantly trying to reduce and lower human consciousness by turning people into these machines and these systems, like you mentioned, Michael, these kind of, isms, these kind of, communism, fascism, socialism, this kind of, all these isms and this kind of corporate capitalist nightmare thing that we're living through and suffering through now, that's just, raping the planet for its short-term profits. And, making people that are sitting in boardrooms trying to maximize their quarterly profits, and that's considered to be the top of some sort of monetary hierarchy of success these days, that has so little to do with actually being an authentic, true human being, and a lot more to do with just how empire wants people to live as machines and to be. Most people seem to only, through our education systems, know how to do their little role in their little piece of commerce. And I think empire is using commerce, the buying and selling of commodities, to make people think that that's all that there is to life and that's all that there is to success. And if you're lucky, you get to go off and do some traveling a little bit here and there. But there's really so much more out there to reality and to deeper understandings of what we're capable of.
And I think and here comes another McKenna quote. So if I mean, if you've ever heard that famous McKenna quote, "Culture is not your friend," that's exactly what it means. It means this empire in this example is forcing you to believe that it is the agent of reality. It is the agent of what is real, what is valuable, and you can't even question it. And that's why culture is not your friend, because it's not. It's an edifice. It's a fake construct, regardless of how persistent it is or how long it's existed. It's just very difficult for us to see past because we're so immersed in it from the time we're born to the time we die, and we rely on it for our most basic needs. So it's very difficult to remind ourselves of that fact. And that's where, these entheogenic experiences or these mystery school experiences come into play, because they, like nothing else, shine a light on that fact. And it's, in a lot of ways, it's, yeah, sure, you could go develop a meditation practice or start going into a float tank 3 or 4 days a week, but it's a lot easier to just blast yourself on a ontological rocket ship out of the reality that you've been forced to conform to.
Yeah. And, when Dick said that the empire never ended, I mean, that is such a dynamic word. I mean, most people know that, Europeans took over and, wiped out a lot of indigenous people. And obviously, like Octavio says in the show, which I think is a very powerful moment that he says, is that, we used to be a global shamanic culture. And that was essentially wiped out by empire, right? Empire went in and kind of took over all this kind of esoteric indigenous knowledge. But at one point, but prior to that, we were a global shamanic culture. And so one day, if we are on this kind of matriarchal cycles of time, we will likely return to being a global shamanic culture as people realize some of these things. But it's a totally good point, Michael. And like Mr. Garfield said, I mean, this kind of machine is very it's very male dominant, and it's totally a suppression of kind of the divine feminine. If you look at the earth as kind of the masculine energy and the moon is the feminine, I mean, we've completely repressed half of our sexuality. And a lot of men today are very alpha male, aren't in touch with their feminine side. So it's huge. It's very mature of you to just basically say like, oh, I went to go see the Arrival when I was bawling. Yeah. It's like, that's a healthy balance of femininity with masculinity. And, we have these dynamics where it's just we're very left brain all the time, and especially in the Western world. So people don't realize that we very much are still in the process of living in this system that kind of mentally keeps us in this prison of our mind, when what you really should be doing is, the way to get out of that is this kind of internal path where that's the beauty of shamanism. And that's something that we highlight in the show, and that all three of us kind of know, is that shamanism is about your direct experience. And it's all about attaining gnosis and direct experience, because you are very much a very divine, powerful being. And I think the real secret sauce is that everybody is very much more powerful than they think. And the empire is always trying to suppress and reduce human consciousness, because so much of what is going on is with our mental capabilities.
You need our X, Y, and Z. You're so weak and helpless on your own. It's that, even though it's not directly said, that is definitely the overarching narrative that comes down from the power structure. I know, Mr. G, I know you got some blasters you've been sitting on.
You just reminded me of what you just said. Reminded me of, I've got an article open about income sharing, and there's a quote in here that said Hugo Award-winning author John Scalzi in 2005 wrote, "Being poor is relying on people who don't give a damn about you." And but there's this other thing in relation to the Phil Dick Empire Never Ended sentiment, which is, I mean, you guys have read Hakeem Bey's Temporary Autonomous Zone, right?
No, sir.
I remember you mentioning that last time I talked to you.
Yeah, it's a foundational text as far as I'm concerned. It was published the same year that they held the first Burning Man on the beach in San Francisco, and it ended up becoming a majorly influential text to the Cacophony Society, which ended up sort of defining the character of Burning Man in Nevada. The Temporary Autonomous Zone is the idea that we can't actually architect a utopia, because a utopia is a static ideological thing, and reality is constantly changing. And so one generation's utopia is the next generation's dystopia. And so, but there's this thing that he returns to over and over again in this book, where he says, the empire never started, because part of this whole notion of the temporary autonomous zone is what he calls ontological anarchism, which is that chaos is the root of reality, and that you can't actually, much in a similar way to David Wade's book Crystal and Dragon, where he argues that there are two basic fundamental ways that esoteric religious traditions have seen absolute reality. One is the sort of Eastern Chi dragon chaos version, the fractal flame of chaos mathematics. And then the other is the Islamic crystalline version, the great perfection, the notion that everything is at its root geometry. And that obviously this is a dialectic, and the way out of this dilemma is through the middle of it, through the acknowledgement of equal and opposite truths. So I pose that it's, on the one hand, yes, the empire never ended, but the equal and opposite truth that allows us to thread this particular needle eye is that the empire never started, that everything is still wilderness, even as we've managed to pave over the entire planet with human artifice, that all of our created environments, all of our virtual realities are still, and this is, forgive me for beating a kind of a tired notion here, but I sometimes feel as though my entire professional life is just re-expressing this idea in every new creative way I can, is that humans are something that nature is doing. Nature is almost a useless concept to the extent that it separates us from the idea of what we are, or it separates the idea of what we are from what we are. And so I see we're in this, we get impatient because history takes longer than we'd like, especially those of us trained on phones. And so we don't recognize how it is actually our ecological science. It's our discovery of chaos and complexity theory, complex dynamic systems, big data, meteorology, all of these things. These are fields that are, on the one hand, breeding a new race of technocrats that believe that the world can be managed as a single giant system. But on the other hand, it's undermining them at the same time. It's proving to those with eyes to see that the empire is a pocket inside of this extraordinary wilderness that will not be dominated, that will not be controlled. It's Jurassic Park. And there's always another company, another competing company, or a weather phenomenon, or some, flip of chance that makes Jurassic Park unmanageable, or Westworld for that matter.
Well, yeah, and time. I mean, if you look at time, I think we're in a period where, if we are in cycles of time, we're coming out of a dark age where you used to, if you stepped on the king's shadow in ancient Hawaii, they'd instantly kill you. We're coming out of this horrible hierarchical time where we still have this hierarchy, but I think we're coming into this kind of new conscious period where more nodes on the network are switching on, and it is getting better. But in terms of like long time, I mean, this negative stuff is, I think, a very small percentage of what human beings have really been over time. Because I think the species is really, I mean, I think we're way older than we think. And
oh yeah.
For most of that,
do we have time on this call to go there?
I know you've gone there, but like through the whole period of how long humanity's been around, I mean, most of that time has not been in this kind of empirical dominator structure of that reduces creativity and makes the three of us always have to wonder why we need to have a paycheck. Why can't we just do our things creatively? Like, why do we need to have this thing where we have to always be constantly trying to find funds for things? I think that's a very small percentage of how it's not a reflection of how human beings are in their natural state, I should say. It's just a temporary blip on the radar.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And the only caveat that I can think of to this idea that we're so much older and so much wiser than we can possibly imagine as a species, and there's probably all this kind of latent collective unconscious or noospheric knowledge that we can tap into from our ancestors, is maybe we've just been so much of that time we've been spending just struggling to survive. Like, we've just barely been getting by. But I don't actually believe that. But I think that would be probably a devil's advocate position, because I think there is growing evidence to show that there have been advanced civilizations for much longer than we suppose. But yeah, I don't know if we have time to get into that, but I would like to get into that in the future. But I think we should talk about. So is it just the first episode of Shamans of the Global Village that's out now with Octavio Rettig, the great toad sage?
Yeah. So basically, because this is an independent project, I mean, we made it for less money than Hollywood spends on their craft budget for a single day on a large production. When I worked with Marvel, there was these huge buffets of food, and I was just like, oh man, how much does this cost? I could make an entire indie film for how much this buffet was today. So the show was made for very little money. I mean, it's something that Rack essentially conceptualized. Rack, I got to give credit to my dear friend and colleague Rack Razam, who's the host of the show. He has, for being a shamanic facilitator for over 10 years, and obviously being off in the astral quite often, he has some great ideas, man. So some of the things that some of the things that he says and does, and ideas that I essentially initially not into, certainly as we explore them, end up being great things to pursue. And we've, as this project is kind of our main collaboration together, it was something that he conceptualized, and we got going together. And it's kind of a perfect fusion of our skill sets, because he essentially is doing most everything in front of the camera, and I'm doing most everything kind of behind the scenes. But in terms of how it was made, we shot the pilot episode in 2015 in Mexico with Octavio. And it is the only episode that exists now. The goal for the show is just to kind of do it, episode by episode, where we are something, of course, as we talk about all this stuff with empire and commerce and money, like here I am saying, please rent our show. Right. So the dynamic of it is, of course, it's like a book where we're just kind of going on the show tour for it, to kind of promote it, to be like, if you're interested in it, if this is something that resonates with you, it's a piece of media that hopefully is like, it has numerous things in it that I think we shot that have basically never been seen on camera before in that way. So it is the first episode, and the idea is, as we kind of do episode per episode, on no set schedule, whenever we can kind of rally the funds to make the next one, we'll hopefully be able to bang out one a year. But at the current dynamic of just the bottom-up way that this is being put together, that's the show plan. So the first pilot, which features Octavio and his work with the Sonoran Desert Toad, each episode is available now, and each episode is going to focus on a different medicine and a different medicine person. That's kind of the concept of the show.
Cool. That's very cool. Yeah, there's so many interesting rabbit holes to jump down with this whole narrative. And even though I kind of feel like everything I know has been assembled from so many different conversations and different documentaries I've watched, or books or articles, but I don't think there's ever been a really good, concise, well put together thing like what you're trying to do, where somebody could probably come into this with zero knowledge and really see, okay, this is what it's like. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. I know I'm a terrible, like I said before we rolled, I'm embarrassed on my level of research on this one, because I definitely should have watched it by now. And I definitely plan to it. I'm excited to. I just have not gotten around to it, but I'm definitely excited. Have you seen it yet, Michael?
No, it's on the list for this weekend.
Yeah, it's something that we're very proud of. It's something that's probably the culmination of Rack and I's life work thus far, and it's basically it's just a story of the telling of Octavio's life. And Octavio is such a kind of archetypical figure in the sense of his life story. And obviously, I would encourage people to listen to the podcast episode that you did, Michael, with him on this show. And not only, like I mentioned, did I find that it was something that we're very proud of as a piece of cinema that really resonates and is, I think, something that we're very proud of. It's something that was just so life transforming for me making it. So I'm finding with these projects that it's almost not about making the project, but it's about the life experience you get out of the project.
Yeah.
But it's something that, we're extremely proud of. And I think it's something that for very little money is a very kind of paradigm crushing piece of media.
Fantastic, man. Well, it's definitely a worthy cause and a project that I think everybody listening to this show is probably going to enjoy immensely, because I can't imagine you with your background in Marvel films and Star Wars are putting out any sort of piece of, like, it's going to be fun to look at. I'm assuming it's also going to be fun to look at. I think that's a problem with a lot of the stuff that I've seen so far, is it's just, quite frankly, not super well put together, and it's not engaging on the level of engaging that we're expecting at this point from our media. So I do think there is a real thirst for this, and it's exciting that somebody of your ilk is doing it. So I can't wait. Greatly appreciate you coming on, and Michael, really appreciate you coming back on. We haven't even talked about your experience at Cosm, man. We're gonna have to carve some time out, because I can't wait to hear about that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, thanks for having us on, Michael. I compliment you on your podcast and what you're doing, and Mr. Garfield, it's good to talk to you again as always. And
keep you on my podcast.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah, anytime. People can watch the show at shamansoftheglobalvillage.com. It'll always be there. So. And keep up what you're doing, what you guys are both doing, doing the good work. It's nice to kind of build the community and build the partners, and kind of, we're all here to kind of help each other, as this is, we're doing leading edge stuff here, and it's not easy. There's struggles for all of us. So it's nice to kind of support each other and kind of always co-promote and help each other. And for anybody that's listening out there, I mean, I know that you're drawn to podcasts like this because of the fellowship of them. So anybody that's out there that might want to contact me, you're more than welcome to. I'd love to hear from you. And I know we all have lacking of fellowship in our day-to-day lives, where we feel like we can't necessarily talk about a lot of this stuff with people that are next to us at the office or our family members. So seek out those kind of others for sure.
Indeed, find the others. And yes, I will be flogging myself with this show until further notice. So I'll be keeping it going. Massive thank you, my friends, for joining us on this hike up Conversation Mountain. And massive gratitude to our sponsors. First of all, Eat Dream Bee. Like I said, I am obsessed with these bars. They taste amazing. Ingredients are legit. And I'm really loving the effect of dream hacking that these things have as well. You can get them at eatdreambee.com/third eye drops. And you can get 20% off there. And also, huge thank you to the best goddamn underwear in the multiverse, Sheath Underwear. You can grab them at sheathunderwear.com, and you can use the coupon code Third Eye Drops for 20% off. And thank you so much to Niles Heckman and Michael Garfield for jamming with us on this episode. Head to shamansoftheglobalvillage.com to watch the show for free, and head to patreon.com/Michael Garfield to support him, and check out his podcast, Future Fossils. And if you want to support the show, head to patreon.com/Third Eye Drops, and please consider becoming a patron and help us grow this thing into what I know that it can be, and get some rewards while you're at it. You can also head to thirdeyedrops.com and support us in a number of ways there. And given that it is the holiday season, why not do your shopping through our Amazon link. It will give us a small kickback, and it will not cost you a goddamn thing. Or you can also buy a psychedelic Kitty Sage Cypher t-shirt, or you can just leave us a nice review and hit the subscribe button on iTunes or however you listen to my mouth noises. Thank you so much, my friends. Greatly appreciate each and every one of you. Be excellent. Join us over on our Facebook group or page or on Twitter or wherever else you can find us. Much, not even much, endless love is being blast forth from my pineal to your pineal, entangled forever and ever, back and forth in a frozen ping pong of loving. And you can quote me on that. See you next week.
Symbiosis complete.